Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharamaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharamaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharamaya Namo Sanghaya Kande Loye Gwenye Dogane Raga Jozan Bonde Jozan Shenye Yabo Gwenye Lozan Zha Sedan Jebo GSTDL so Rinpoche Choche Melo Zhang Rira Linje Ninde Genpo De Sanje Shinto Mede Gyoba Rongwe Nanda Jina Jeba Yo Idang Guru Rana Mandela Niyanda Ya
Sanje
Sheda Zoje Shona La Janjo Balo Dane Jabzo Dagi Shushu Jibe Sonam Je Rola Benje
Sanje Andro Vara Sho Sanje Shoda Zoje Shona Sunso Bado Dane Jabzo She Dagi Shushu Jibe Sonam
Rola Benje Zanje Robara Sho Sheda Zoje Shona La Janjo Balo Dane Jabzo She Dagi
Shushu Jibe Sonam
Rola Benje
Sanje Robara Sho Kangi Ado Zenera Tuna Dawa Danje Bambe Zera Dambe Zena Donde Kotaman de la Janze Lo Kangi Ado Zenera Tuna Dawa Danje Bambe Zera Dambe Zena Donde Kotam de la Janze Kangi Ado Zenera Tuna Neva Dawa Danje Bambe Zera Dambe Zena Kotaman de la Janze Lo 다 톱잘라나 매바 양담으로 도배 산지 공방을 뭐지 진해자 토버자 디 토버자비 철도 에네 비게지 다외 송라 탐제지 네 뒤바 상주랑된 샴보 세냐베 콜롱 군주 지름 바남 레버세 답도 샘버 휴스
May I remind all of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate bodhicitta motivation or the altruistic motivation seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should participate in this Lamrim teaching on stages of path enlightenment that brings together all the essential points of practice.
오다 디네 마천이 다 셈베 센자 담배 추지 참능이라서 활동점모 각자 명진의 마 초보적이 다 드링데 데리 들어와 가서 다 부익 제비나 니 가서다 식단이 식대가 또 반도 다디 인지 가발이 되나 다디 가르쳐이나 다 공디 간제 시에는 맞지 다 디스기 서러다 가르쳐고 선배 가자달라 꾼다다 현디 니 쳬베더니 다 직체 디 시반도 직체 다 도운로부터 아니 비게제 온실로서 땀이기 시변 진단데 단다 각장 고야데 가르잖아 온실로서 똑바 똥미기 시베기 현유선한테 진단데 고고 말레스 티 송고요사레스 다디 쳬르세야 다 슌담디 드네 마임바유 Teacher repentant soon chomra chavi lonis yeshi tokba konata deya tatun zamba ni sam teda ti tagwe yu chebra chen tondogwe tokba nam yinti tokba na yinji tongmi tokba kanyi tamje mi chawo ati sungdowa ta kongdi chebe ani pige juden te ichana 요된 대 있잖아 아니 가르잖아 지 단디 갑라지 현유수 총 현유수 마숑세야 깨지 세기도 와 현유수 총 마숑 깨지 세기 와래 디 가르치는 세기 와라잖아 진단 지들 로디 가르 로이 현유수 총 마숑 로디 가르데지 샤그데잖아 어디선도 로디 가르데지 샤그데잖아 아니 비지 이시 똑박 들어 이시 똑박 다 똑바리스 로디 똑바도 동민이 나래 똑바르마도 동민이 기바 마레시 카탄라고 찍바제라와 똑바리스 아지라서 똑바 코나 다 다이나 똑바이나 아니 아니 똑바 탐제 똑바 댄지 똑바 탐제를 했잖아 대야 마레스 똑바라야 아니 돈 tum바다 미tum바다 근데 그 망고지 요래 똑바 근데 망고지 요래 근데 그 똑바다니 그게 제 다든 봐 최지 단지다 가사 단지 니 근데 송도한데 대야 다든 봐니 삼 대다게 딱베 다든 봐니 삼 세두발라 최지 단지다 가사 단지 니 샤는 대다게 봐 딱베 대다가 딱베 유체버를 피게 돈도 똑바남 레 마도 찍기 아니 피게 제 대다게 좀 민도베 똑바다지 여러분 최지 단지데 간사게 단지 니기 또 마다게 되는 똑바 돈지 망고 여러 봤던데 근데 제베테네 똑바 탐제 다 돈데 되는 똑바 강이 탐제 미샤오 송도와 기노 데스기어레.
So we're on page 212 in volume number 3 of your English translation of Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the state of the path to enlightenment. As a matter of fact, where we left off last time was the first paragraph on page 212. Now, just to kind of remind ourselves where we are in this section on vipassana or special insight into ultimate nature of things. Tibetans call it lakdong, translated as special insight or penetrative insight, okay, vipassana. And a major outline that we have seen quite some time ago is identifying objects of negation. What are we negating or should be negating in order to understand what the ultimate nature is? Yeah. And so we have seen many different viewpoints with regard to that, and we have seen the refutation of various viewpoints, if you will. And one of the major points that I made some time ago and emphasized it over other times is in terms of grasping, there are two types of grasping. In other words, there is intellectually formed grasping, in Tibetan called kuntak, yeah. And then there is innately developed grasping, which is called lenje, that's just inborn thing. Okay? So it's very important for us to be able to understand distinction between those two types of grasping. One is intellectually formed grasping, and the other is innately developed or formed grasping. The reason why we need to understand that is, for us to be able to understand what is being negated or refuted. Okay, what is the object of negation? And as we talked about this the other day also, that we are not refuting what are called referent objects of sensory perceptions or consciousnesses. Yeah, sensory consciousnesses are what we call non-conceptual perceptions or non-conceptual mental processes. Okay? And so we are not refuting or negating what we call referent objects. The Tibetan term is shenyul of sensory non-conceptual consciousnesses or perceptions. Okay? But then in the realm of conceptual processes or cognitive processes, perceptions, again we have to understand the difference between what we call factual conceptual processes, cognitive processes, and then incorrect or mistaken conceptual cognitive processes. Because all conceptual processes are not one and the same thing. Some got it all messed up, wrong, right? And others are, fine in terms of, relating to their objects. So again here, we are not refuting, objects of what we call factual or unmistaken cognitive conceptual processes. What we are refuting here are the referent objects of mistaken, messed up, conceptual cognitive processes. Okay, so that's very important for us to understand the difference here. So what are they exactly, if you say, because there are a lot of, what I call messed up, conceptual cognitive processes, mistaken ones. But among them, the two culprits are, if you can characterize them as such, are what we call grasping at self of phenomena, Tenzin, and grasping at the self of a person, Tenzin. So those two forms of graspings that we have within us, so these are mistaken, what we call conceptual cognitive processes, which exist and function within our mind. And so these graspings, they fabricate, and they superimpose intrinsic reality onto things that is not there at all. Okay, and then they grasp at that very intrinsic reality, that we have fabricated, and that is what we call referent object of mistaken conceptual cognitive processes. And that kind of referent objects are what we are negating or refuting. Okay. So are you with me so far? So as I stated in the text very clearly, that we are not suggesting in any way that we should completely stop all the conceptual thought processes, right? That's not the point. What we're saying is that among the conceptual processes, there are those that are mistaken, there are those that are unmistaken. But leave alone the unmistaken one, right? But deal with the mistaken conceptual processes. How do they, fake out, if you will, or fabricate, superimpose, just cook it all up, kind of reality we call intrinsic reality that's not there, and then project it onto person and phenomena, and then we believe, that's how it is, press the button, as I say. So that's what we're talking about, So that fabricated reality needs to be understood, realized, and then know that it doesn't exist. It's a figment of imagination, No.
Well, oh yeah.
I think I amused Khensur much.
공도 시에 아니 다 똑바 탐제 말에 추지 단지 생기다 간사 단지 생기레스. 대 돈도베 아니 비게지 현유등 고고 요아레 신 시에라 봐. 다 똑바실 리기야. 다 원나 쓰기야. 다 원나 틴데스네 똑바 탐제 멤버체. 간사 단지 추지 단지 생기지 마릭파티 예베이나 돈도 주디. 신앙이 추나라 아니 틴데게 마릭바테게 돈도 주디. 간데리 센다 대화실리기야. 잘라. 대화실리기도가 대화실 뒤를 따티 중중도가 돼. 원나 마릭바티 랑게 안테 라신 돈도베 추대 센라이 냠나. 따티 대화실리가 돼. 마릭바테게 이 샤그레 마리부터 샤비나 타이 돈도 센도아티 돈도 신앙이 추나라 돈도 간데리 센네 대화직리 베제 라와다. 아주 대화직리 베제. 다디 내를 가르친 거였는데 대마송도가 아니 베게 제리 로본디 흉내 대학이 로본디 소리잖아. 다 로본 다와탁 봐. 로본 다와탁 봐. 다 오메 장기 흉 참어 망보셔 봐다. 로본 다와탁 베 흉디 로본 다와탁 반디 흉내 아니 콘좀땀디 되베 동담나라 라신지 라젠나 랑게 모셔발라 속에 타닌 제바 망도 나나항세 와다 쓰기였다. 로본 다와 작베 흉내 아니 피게지 흉내 가서 콘좀땀디 되베 콘좀땀디 되발 땀제 가르치기였잖아. 다디 각자도 제 그러다. 랑게 모도 봐 랑게 생이지 봐 랑신지 봐. 근데신 티스기였다. 땀제야 될 마도 양 잡고 요리 양 코나도 제 랑경오 요스근도 라긴 요스근도 돌류 요스근도 양 샴도 받는데 매스근도 택간데 있는 삼그러봐. 얘양 땀돼야 되게 땀돼 주주를 땀 믿음바 망고 요래. 다나 다시 인보 가이나데 난갈라야 맹도 뭐 속경어 보 맹도 뭐 난갈라야 맹도 뭐 땀돼 주주들라 아니 다시 란주비스나 아니 그게 temperature ba che kore ti ma de rang thini to ba rang to ba che ko ya ke yo mare sin che ke che che ge ba pa de tenje el so na ti tamra ti gi di chi ba tamra ti chi ba re samra teke rangi ngo tuba rakenshi tuba ta kanje tempa tuba kache ne thamje le ti che kure mato che ki garsa che tempa tuba che rangi tuba ma che seya ki ni tawa je yung mare se yorda o che ta lubon dawa thakbe de ma thinde to jubi na garsa lubon dawa thakbe chun le kun tu tam de trebe thon nam las ta kun tu tam de tro so kunzo tamdi tursido rangi tingi ji madubi ngo yorwata ta nyugu ngo karere nyugu rangshen karere nyugu toli rabdi kandere sigi tse chegi yorwata ki madubi tingi sigi yorta tamra ti pa jebi tingi rangi ngo madubata rangshen ji madubati tse yan duwas tanyi bi loyi ngo le ya tayan duwas taya yorwa gantu che yinata kare ine chul taya yorwa nyugu ngo se yabe di karere sigi yorta o di karere rabri chūna rāngi āni kharasāda, dī lā sāsā gāda. Yō lūpōng dīshūn tōng namla āni rāngshēn nam. Yāng tī rāngshēn jī māntūpa, tōmbā māntūpa tīngi chū tētā tī nyūgula sōpa chīnā chū kharījina tī rāngshēn rabu chī chīk sikidu, ngōya sikidu. Tā sōkdē nāla kari yōba yīna, āni pīki tāñī jī māngdu nāngidu ās, tāñī rabu māngdu sikidu ās. 티직작 지그러방아도 제대 감라 뿌데 양이다 만든 라면다 제안도 단지 야기 제야 제 우리 마도 양티 디마제비 띵네 양 제야요 말아봤다 어 땀제야 되게 땀라 되게 제비 띵네 나나 항시여다 근데게 양제 깨져 망고지 해리어라 견나랑 그 땀라 티 제비 띵디 해 근데 그때니 망고 책이 요래세 단이 망고 책인 누가 여바 예나야 각제 감들 쓰기 있어다. 들니 세야디 감들이 be 각작 그 라케 주르바도 마두스 각제 감되네 가사 감. 추 가야 롱에 유남라다. 가사 이나인다. 가사 추다 가사 니드체베 추 이나인다. 오 간디시 임바 이나야다. 유남라 로여 온기 작관 멤버 추 대남라 랑게고 랑게고네 네투 내둘람 돌로지 요브란 zemba 대인라스 다 단지디 대화티 랜 남린 참 시샤도 제비나 랜티 잡으다 랜티 잡으려 아나 마릭빈 틴타 좀도 두디 간데리스킨 대화티 랜 단디 어 대인라스 당아도 마리바 딘당 그 좀도 두디 강기 차니 셰 대야기디 잔 디스기어다 대송도 가르쳐다 로이 온기 샤관 멤버 슈 대남데 랑게 모두반 딘데기 로 온기 샤관 멤버 세거다 로 온기 샤관 멤버 모두반 딘데기 디 돌류 유반 딘데기 와다 디 존도 디 대이 센터 랜드부 직종 버리스 디와텔라
So what we just talked about is this, that even within the category of conceptual cognitive thought processes, there are those which are unmistaken and there are those which are mistaken. In the category of mistaken conceptual cognitive processes, the two main what called troublemakers, if you will, are grasping at self of a person and grasping at self of phenomena. Okay? And as a matter of fact, these graspings constitute what we call ignorance, avidya, marikpa in Tibetan. Okay? And because of this ignorance, we fabricate completely the kind of reality that's really not there, but then we think it is there. Yeah, that's how crazy we go, So now, a question is raised, right, relating to that, which is in the middle of page 212. It says, how does ignorance superimpose intrinsic nature? Okay, so basically, if we are in this conversation, so we tell, maybe Chandrakirti or whoever is telling us this, like, yeah, I got it. Okay, so what you're saying is that, not all conceptual thought processes are messed up, and we have to get rid of them. I got that. Okay, that's what you're saying. Okay, I got it. And then you also said that we, fabricate or superimpose, something onto phenomena. It's not there. Okay. Now the question is, how does the ignorance do that? Superimpose kind of reality. It's not there. Explain that to me. And then in the response, it says the Loben, the master here refers to Chandrakirti, right, who is a representative of Prasangika Madhyamika school of thought, the highest level, right, the top-notch, Buddhist philosopher here. And he said, so Chandrakirti explains that, yeah, I get it, why people often get confused, we deal with, the kind of nature that's not there. Because in the Buddhist literature, these are the terms which are kind of used often in many different contexts. For example, we say ngo, sometimes translated as identity or nature, right? Or the Rangshin is nature, the ngo is identity. So these terms are, often used in many different contexts. And sometimes it sounds like, well, phenomena have nature, they have identity. Other times they don't have identity. So it seems like there are contradictory statements which are not, because those are used in different contexts. So Chandrakirti says, I understand, why you are getting confused, because those terms are thrown out in many different contexts. So in order to kind of, tease out all this, the terms and get rid of confusion, we need to understand that phenomena exist nominally and conventionally. Okay? We are not denying that, right? Things exist, conventionally. So what does that mean? If you go deeper down into that matter, what it means is that, things, exist as merely imputed phenomena. Okay? That's what it means. So at that level, right, the things exist conventionally. They function, conventionally as it is. For example, Khensur Rinpoche gives this example of a sprout, nyugu. Okay? So we can talk about sprout. It's something you can see, right? And you can describe it. Sprout has its own identity, right? It has its own nature. So at a conventional level, we can talk about what is sprout, right? And its conventional identity and nature. But then under the ultimate analysis, it does not have intrinsic identity and intrinsic nature. That's just a pure fabrication by our mind. Okay? So we have to keep those two levels of reality, accordingly, if you will. So our ignorance, the fundamental ignorance, avidya, it superimposes intrinsic reality that is not on, on person, that is not on phenomena. Okay? And so what is that exact intrinsic reality that's being fabricated? Is, as it is explained, that intrinsic reality refers to the kind of reality that can exist in and of itself, without depending upon any kind of a conceptual imputation. Okay? If there is a reality that does not depend on, right, terms and concepts, that does not depend on that kind of a labeling or imputation, but it could stand alone on its own. It's like, I'm here. I don't care. I don't depend on anybody else. Just me, right? Kind of a thing. Exists objectively under its own right, on its own, without need to rely upon terms and concepts and conceptual imputation, then that reality is called intrinsic reality. But that reality is our total fabrication. We are good at making it up. And then we impute it onto person and phenomena, and then we perceive person and phenomena to exist in that mode. Now we think self and phenomena exist in and of themselves from their own side. They have nothing to do with terms and concepts, imputation. That's where we got it wrong. Okay? And so that is what we are trying to figure it out. We are trying to refute that kind of reality which is not there, so that we will be able to, resolve our confusion and our grasping at fabricated reality. No.
Oh, this is good. Can they contact the Bajana? Tobe only Shaka, member two of the Tenzin twins. Tenzin, but that did take some day song doa. That Tenzin, but tea. Tenzin, but Jaku, tea, Cetera Sumes, tea, Cetera Sume, you numb, tea, Cetera to be you, Chuno, Grand, and Tolu, Telani, Da Camara, Dakpa, Tazunga Gone. No somewhere chades. That is your. The Candia Sungresana. And I come to hear a church Tenzin, the Kansak Tenzin, but the Candia Sungresana. That is Cetera Soy. Korang Soy, any picket, can use your Vayula. 那有属于就有现有些这个的先别有的是样大概有些哪里先别有的我样个我的现有是就那么让的多路上天啦你是的的都被我给下班买吧就那个让的我主把俺们让进去主把多路去这个有把天啦你다 가르치기 민 가르다가 인사나 다 감 라힌시 딱 타송게 다도 두바 라힌시 두바 세니피게지 요아르베스나 요 마레스 메비 이나야 딱 타송게 온게 샤쇼고 요아레스 요 마레 걔데 요베 이나 딘데지 요고 그레세네 다티 딱 타송세야 되고 대송고 있어래 걔데 요 마레 드니 쇼기 다단 가사 다니부디 요 마레디 이나야 요베 이나 딱바 타송게 관에 애니피게지 데라와지 요구리 세네 애니피게지 뭐송 가르쳐다 가르사 타송게 온게 타송게 관에 뭐송을 자대 요가 말이 딱바 타송게 온게 때문에 뭐송아지 자대 어디 송게 알다
something I learned from the previous explanation that I need to catch up here. And so that's why in the Buddhist philosophical literature, these terms, ngo, identity, rangshin, nature, are used in many different contexts. And sometimes there are statements which said, yes, what's called persons and phenomena have identities and nature, right? Other times they said, persons and self phenomena don't have identity. So it gets very confusing. So we have to be able to differentiate the meanings of identity and nature in different contexts. So in the context of what we call refuting or negating what we call objects of negation, I'm repeating myself, nature or identity has a very particular meaning. What it really means is something existing in and of itself without relying upon any terms and concepts. Are you with me? Okay. Now the question is, the next explanation given is, does such a reality exist? No. Okay. So why are we talking about it? Hypothetically speaking, right? That's what it is. Dakpa Tarsung. Hypothetically speaking, if phenomena have intrinsic reality, then what it would be like? What should it be, right? Hypothetically speaking, that's what it should be. Things exist in and of themselves, under their own right, from their own side, without anything to do with terms and concepts and labeling. Okay? And such a reality doesn't exist, but hypothetically speaking, that's what it should be. Okay? So that's what we're dealing with. As you can see in the second paragraph, or the middle paragraph from page 212, ontologically speaking, ontology means, as you know, how do things actually exist, right? What's the ontological status of phenomena? Then we say that, ontologically speaking, that persons and phenomena do not exist in and of themselves intrinsically. Okay, and so if that's the real nature, then we really need to understand what is being fabricated by us, isn't it? Things don't exist in that way, but our ignorance fabricates and superimposes that reality on the things, and then we get clack, okay, that's what we are doing. Okay. And as Khensur Rinpoche explained, that in the Buddhist science of mind, or science of mind in Buddhism, to be proper, there's a lot of explanations about mind and cognitive processes, and different types of objects that our perceptions, perceptions have. We can talk about appearing object, nangyul, right? We can talk about the engaging objects, the main objects of perceptions. We can talk about the referent objects, for lack of a better word in English, called xianyul, like something you're clinging to, that kind of object. So there's so many different types of objects. And when we talk about objects of negation, really we are talking about referent objects. Okay, we are not talking about appearing object. We are not talking about engaging objects. We are talking about, what we call this grasping, clinging object thing. Okay.
That's it. 딱바 타송게 거네 딱 오송송하다. 지당 요 다니 그때 유럽도 요 말했디 다세 아디 요 말했디 이네 딱바 타송 건디 샤버레스. 딩고 송고 우리 송소아 나타 디 시진럽도 가래서나 디 송도다 디 책디 시잡이 인도 가버리다 디궁오 메바데 테나 다니 요 마이시다 디 가르송교 알아서는 친한교 오복규 다 딘데바 자기 그르다다 친한교 오복규 애니 피게제 라와요 마레스 로 온게 샤과감 또베 온게 마착베 라와도 두바지 요 마레스 제송교 살아봐 로 온게 샤과감 또베 온게 샤과 마임베 신앙게 슈남 아니 피게세요 라와 메바테스 달로 온게 샤과다 또베 온게 샤바 마임베 추지 라와 메바 가르스 티네치 마두바이 손타 틴데케데 마두바 달라 가르스이랬잖아 아니 간사가 다음 아니 추다제네 드나 다니 틴데케데 요와 마레스 틴데케데네 아니 자와니네 요와 마레스 송도가 드나 다니 요 마이스 와테티 인데바 디디운데바 디보체라와 드나 다니 요 마이스 예다 티네 티송도가 다 디게 샴데가 마야 디 디보체 디게 샴데바 시베 서와다 시베 시잡인 데발레 간데 송선 따디 틱 저기 저기 시잡아 배절이 인도 가버리 디 랑데라고 제비나 디송기 사레스리다 디송기 두송기도 디 아니 피게 시잡인 데벨레스 데나스 다 추와 데나스 서와다 디타티와다 가제 깜데나스 단tak만도 시야 가제데 배 남미데 가서 갈 돈이 세기요 말이 그래 카톡기티 람링 좀 그래 카톡기티 가리뚱네 어디마 세기요 알아봐 어 제비 인다다 가제감 되나 신되나 세야데 가제감 되나 가르송게 알아서나 가랑게 오타세 직랑게 오두바 요르베잖아 대민두스 아나다 랑게지 두바 요르베잖아 대민두스 아니 로라 마드베 향와 로라 마드베 라왕 그 비게 수직을 마드베 라왕 그 주바지 요르베잖아 대민두스 아니 야 현라라 말레바 현라라 말레베 이니 양치 비게지 인 비게지 쇼르바지 요르베잖아 대민두스 오 대다 아니 제비인다 다티는 남강 시티지 송거도가 시티지 송거도가 시 대다 남랑도 송바 따로 다 가운데 시베게 가르쳐버렸잖아 제 랑게 모투바스나인다 랑게지 투바스나인다 라완도 투바스나인다 현라라 말레바 투바리 세나에도 건조 가르쳤나 남랑리 민게 남랑리 마도 찍바 차기요 아래 가자 찍바 차기요 아래 각자한테 가도 컨트롤 켜버려 개요 말에 각자 찍버리 나 민게 남랑 찍고네 근데 맞대는 파버리 나는 민게 남랑 아주 지탱 감리 있는면나 민게 남랑 센타지 나와 던돌이야 시시젠 시기를 다 보게 온 제비자 너가 그래서 한 먹고 보게 온 제비나 시시젠 시기를 오가르젠 시기를 라봉젠 시기를 던도 민팅 죽게 타데 그래 님의 친구 텔은 주부를 마도 저게 야 텔레 민들이기 가르쳐 버렸다 민트라바 같은데 야 민게 남랑 세네 세버려 어떤 나hin기 건디 세베게 가자 세부 두버 돼야 아니 비게지 민게 남랑 세 마도 젤라 야지 민트라바 세네 비게지 각자 카가 가야요 말이지 어디 숨기게 살아
On page 212 we have a statement quoted from Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, Shikjaba in Tibetan. And the statement reads, all of this is without its own power. Therefore, there is no self, unquote. Okay? So the explanation given on this, all of this means everything that exists, we call internal phenomena and external phenomena. All of this, they have no power to exist independently, in and of themselves. They don't have that power. Okay? So therefore, there is no self. The kind of self we talk about, the self of a person and self of phenomena, those selves don't exist. Okay? And then in the commentary on the 400 stanzas, it is stated, I quote, "It is that which exists essentially, intrinsically, autonomously, and without depending on another," unquote. Okay, so this is a commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. So the explanation Khensur Rinpoche has given is this, that things cannot exist in and of themselves. The Tibetan word is called mo, which has been translated as essentially here, I think. Okay, they cannot have that kind of identity existing, on its own. They cannot have intrinsic nature, which is rangshin, Tibet. Okay, intrinsic nature. They cannot exist independently or autonomously. Okay, we call rawang, right? Rawang. And they cannot exist without depending on another. So in 4 different ways, the kind of nature that doesn't exist is described. Okay? But all of these are different terminologies used, but they boil down to the same thing. They're all different expressions meaning the same thing. And the example Khensur Rinpoche is given, which is in Tibetan, so it probably won't make that much sense to you. For example, for the moon, Tibetans have different names, expression, right? Its moon is called Dawa. Then it's called the silsel chain, the one that gives the cooling effect, right? Then there's the Rinpoche chain, there's the bunny in the moon, we believe, okay, rabbit. And then there's the Waker chain. But all these names just refer to the moon. It's different, interesting expressions. So just like that, when we say that phenomena do not have independent nature, intrinsic nature, okay, and essential nature, or the kind of nature without, that does not depend on anything else, these are different ways of saying the same thing. Okay? So according to, of course, Prasangika Madhyamika school. Just my first footnote today. Remember, we talked about this in different philosophical contexts. According to Prasangika Madhyamika school, in the context of object of negation, this is where we are, right? Don't take out of the context, the identity and nature, all that. Moyoduba, existing essentially or from its own nature, in and of itself. Rangshinji Duba, okay, the intrinsic existence. Ranguna Duba, existing from its own side. And Rawanda Duba, independently, all of this mean the same thing. Whereas in other schools, it may not. For example, Savatandika Madhyamika schools say things do not exist truly, right, but they exist intrinsically. Whereas according to Prasangika, said, no, things don't have true existence, and neither do they have intrinsic existence, So Prasangika Madhyamika, for them, true existence, intrinsic existence, objective existence, existing by way of its own characteristics, all of them mean the same thing. So we have to know that the use of the terminologies in different philosophical contexts.
제르무지스나 데 겐라라 말레시비 현디 에니피게 주젠라라 말레비 데 주젠라 세베리스나 마리스 다 주젠라라 말레비 세시 줄젠라라 말레비 시기 메신 시기 다 현디 가리샤세서나 제르무지를 바티와르스탄다 겔라라 말레시니 테 많이 송그래 다 템메나 다 현라라 말레시비 현디 쇼 현디 세서나 세서나 대송도 마이치스 유제 탄입이 시발라 현시 차대 단데 세부시부도 유제 탄입이 시바직다 돈담기 시바센당아도 가도 로리 니 하그라 봐 가서 군급 담바싱지다 담바니 주베인다 군급기 담바싱지다 돈담기 담바싱지 주고요 봐 다 건세 따라봐 다 돈담기 베게 담발로 야 유디 진겐 달다 탄입이 로스겐이 송기 매버인 말이야 다 군도비 담바티게 유디 진겐이 탄입이 로스 열어봤다 탄입이 로스도 다제 가르쳐 그러다 나라도 줄래 즉 똑바다 다다 되는 그게 봐 망고 쉬우지 열어봤다 근데 그 탄입이 로데라 어디 현시 잡이 대신 대샤기 송겨 또도르잖아 현시 차대 다 탄입에 아니 피게 지 시바라 현시 차대 탄입에 시바 뒤에 온기 샤바 멘베 현라라 말레파오 다 현라라 말레시아게 현데 탄입이 시바라 샤네 다 친한게 쇼 강식 탄입이 시바 델라 샤바 멘베게 아니 지 도바 임바 이나타 현라라 말레 도바레 티요 마레세다 다 현라라 말레시아데 텐데 카둘라 다지 제가 차기요. 땡진 대반 용세도. 땡진 대반 저도 현라 떠봐. 현을 줘봐. 아니 그게 제 가리인다. 다 깨도 망고치 열었다. 깨도 망고치 열었다. 가리 어떤 데 해도 열었다. 제가 세단 다 현을 맞춰봐. 지 주야요 말이지. 제가 펜도 있나인다. 나 펜도 있나인다. 메치도 있나 간데지네. 현 뜨우러. 뜨다 뜬주치니 야마도 그래. 제가 펜도 있나 다 수직을 뜨 먹어. 나이 생겼지 야투고 매빈 버 뜨고요 강길 라면데 톨 뜨고요 다인데 와 뜨고도 하대 다 남아도 하고 그랬대 내 싫어 하고 말이 안 듣던데 간디 뜨고요 매 싫어 하고 말 제다 뜨고도 제가 다디 탄입이 현세야 돼 탄입이 시발이 샤네 될라 말레비 직접서나 현라 말레비 두브리 티요 말이 신단디나 세보체는 송버레스
Towards the end of page 212, it is stated, I quote, "Thus he says that those are synonyms, essentially existent, intrinsically existent, autonomously existent, and existing without depending on other. All of these are synonyms. Okay, without depending on another does not mean not depending on causes and conditions, so forth." So now the question that's being asked is, right, if you say that phenomena cannot exist without depending on other, right? So what is this other, right? Explain to me, what does other mean? Now some maybe scholars explain the other referring to causes and conditions. So if you go with that, what it means is that things cannot exist without depending upon causes and conditions. Okay, that has the meaning, right? Okay, but according to Rinpoche, right, the other does not refer to causes and conditions alone, because that becomes a really very limited notion. Because then, what about what we call non-produced phenomena, non-composite phenomena? They don't have causes and conditions, right? But they are dependently existent. So the other here, according to Rinpoche, refers to what we call conventional perception or consciousness. Okay, Tanyebelo. Okay, and so now, as we have talked about this some another time, that in reality, according to one classification, could exist on two different levels. One is what we call conventional truth or conventional reality, right? Some vritti satya in Sanskrit. The other one is ultimate reality, pramartha satya, Tendamdeba in Tibetan, isn't it? And so those are the two types of realities we need to deal with. And so things exist. Their existence are what we call verified by conventional perceptions, conventional consciousnesses. Okay? Because there are different sets of consciousnesses. Those that deal with conventional nature of things or reality, and those that deal with ultimate reality or nature. Okay? So the conventional consciousnesses which deal with conventional reality, for example, exist in our mind, called all the thought processes we have, cognitive processes, thought. Right? These are the conventional consciousnesses. So things cannot exist without depending upon the subjective perceptions. In other words, without depending upon the conventional perceptions or consciousnesses. Okay. So what that really tells us is one of the fundamental principles in Buddhism, right? Things exist dependently. Everything is pratit samudpat, tendal in Tibetan, right? So what does dependent existent mean? Well, there are different explanations. One is depending upon causes and conditions. The other is dependent, existing in terms of relativity. Okay, and so it has different meanings. Okay, so which shows us that if things exist dependently, then what are they depending upon, isn't it? They couldn't exist on their own. They are dependent on something else. Okay, and so what is that something else we're talking about? According to Rinpoche, it refers to conventional perceptions or conventional consciousness here. So that shows the interdependent relationship among things. That's how things exist, right? Even at a very macro level, how does our world exist with all these countries and nations? Well, we are heavily dependent upon each other, isn't it? And Khensur Rinpoche says, you know much better about these things than I do. Maybe politically they are dependent, economically dependent, I don't know, whatever other ways they are dependent on each other. No nation could exist just by itself, without depending on anybody else, And then in our family setting also, at a more of a what called the exo level, how family members depend on each other, in community. So all of this tells us that nothing could exist independently, right, without relying upon something else, Okay.
Also, that is it. I am quite. What did you want? 10 hours and what? You sent in the instant, Yanara, Malaysia, sent it, a teaching who sung, but that you didn't teach. Tina Rawa, he chatted, you Tedag Rangi, Neluk some, Dolu Tumo Mayimbe Wos. Tenila Rangi Moda, Rang Rajenta, that Tanji going to hear he chaos here. That Kalsungerson Tati, going to Trumpet you then Tinde Jintata, Rama said to what you are Mari, Rama she was named. You did not getting any Rangi in PhD, Nelu, some Nelu in Nainda, Dolu in Nainda, Tumo Maimbe, any PhD Kalsorta. Kajatida any PhD. Tumo Maimbe, any Kakasa to the Maveries, Kajatida to the Maveries. Tinde we tell a Maver, Tindota, Kajatida to be more Maveries, Tenila ranking water, Ranki Showers, Kajati Yubayina, Tindis Yubayina, Kajatida Maver, Kajatida Yubayina, Tenila, ranking water to Basanenda. Ranking to Basanenda, what he Petamason Karsa, or T. Hugins, T. Karsata, T. Teller, or the ranking water, ranking to Ba, and Tendela, ranking to Ba, his house, and Dontinal, what is he and Tixum Gustare.
So at the bottom of page 212, so there's an explanation about how it's for that reason, because things couldn't exist without depending on another, so therefore they couldn't exist autonomously or independently, on their own. So that kind of autonomous nature, intrinsic nature, it doesn't exist in reality, but hypothetically speaking, right? And that's the kind of essence of nature we say things don't have, phenomena don't have. Okay, and
어다 디스디 발 다티야 근데 뺀다고 샤기도 와대 뺀아 송도 와다 대양 뺀아 송도 와다 빼샤야 디갑라야 엄마 란주비스네 다 텐주비스네 빼소소소 야 임바래 엄마 뺀나 란주비 갑던도 얘나 아니 좀 캔식 두여와 가지고 좀 캔기 두야들라 빼초도 나고 인식이야래 감들 텐주 갑라이나 다 타달 두든 좀 받대 타달 두든 좀 받게 빼초도 나고 인식 다디 감들 타달 두든 좀 받대 빼송도와 빼나 송도와 탁발라 두두 딱 받대 내내 그 뒤징오네 제대로 딱 받대 샤네 아니 그게 대랑게 오 권에 아니 그게 제대로 이 제바나 유등도 아니 뒤니 마두베 디 제바 디 제바 메바 제바 힌두스 다디 시다 가르가리나 타보에 두이 가이 한 먹다다 다 간제 탁달 뒤 생겨라 달라야 체주 망고고 왔다 양지 산나웅 전에 그제 탈란의 지위에는 대하고 말로 나온거 봐 그래야 뭐 봤세 맞지 그래 빼샤요 빼제날 그래 타다 뒤든 좀 뒤야기 도감도 간제됐나 세 맞지 사르라 말로 세 맞지 아니 탁다 거래지 다 빼망고 망자다 텐도 죽인다 타다 거라야 아니 비게 뒤대다 나지 칠룩 뒤던다와 송여다 칠룩 뒤던다와 근데지 갑라 람상 왔다 그 미직 대대는 타다 뒤리샤 쟤네 딱그 신앙 시우지께지 왔다 내 뒤도 쟤네 그게 신앙 시우지 제기라 봐다 제기라 봐 뒤지 뒤인데 다디 뒤지 뭐네 제대로 딱 봐대 샤네스다 타달이야 뒤지 뭐네 딱 봐대 봐 딱제를 붙잖아 마셔보지 뒤인샤 전에 해되나 쓰였다 해셔라 봐딱 봐대 샤네스 디파샤 다 디파샤 사는 하나 가르치고 그랬는데 대송도 샤네 두랑게 뭐거네 제대로 제바 송대 얘네 제바 송대 유등도 뒤니 두바메바 디 제바라도 메바 힌두 다티 타다티 뒤리 삼데베 깔들아야 아니 비게지 타다티 뒤이나 메나 삼게 디 제바시야 디 파샤 근데기 킬룩 뒤든 답에 탁바 될라야 다 뒤리샤들 제니 유나 메나 민니 유나 메나 순도 가리 유나 메나 근데 제기 대비나 이 영야 요르베스네 요 말이스 탁제 땡도 두기 차시 종세자 요 말이스 탁제 땡도 두기 차시 종세자 매벌라야 다 뒤들라지 순도 간데도 다 순도 최종 간데도 근데 제기 대비나 영야 요르베스네 요 말이 탁제 땡도 두기 차시자 요 말이스 순고여 살다 다인데 대범망고 얘기를 그래 가도기 제비나 근데 순고도 와야 대범망고 다 이자수순 되다단 대범망고 여러 봤던 강해라 각잘 되고 강해 전부 태기 왔다 대범망고 짜기 왔다 이단 대송도 안돼 파샤네 두랑게 뭐거네 지다라 이 제반나 유등도 뒤니 마두베 도요 말아봐 타데팅도 뒤 도요르세나 두기 차게 종세게 민두 티 매신도 애니비게디 제바라티 제바 가르다 티 뒤디 간데디 세종라보다 부간라보다 난다 가다 제 근데 간데도 가지 독소 개대 소 야비나 양제 주도 니 단계 숨 단계 되게 뛰어 있어라 뒤를 가실 뛰어 있어라 가전 단계도 센 애니 대비나 대요하르베스나 대용야야 요 말아 타데진도 두기 차게 종세게 맞도봐 다디 뒤딱 ngô 송데 대간 제바 지기 때나 디 영야요 말이 센적 송도가 신도 다디 빼라와 다디 빼 차차가 제라와 남린 좀 해야잖아 대빼지 다디 신도 센도와 다빼 대신도 타데진 두기 종세 두기 차게 종세게 맞도봐 대신도 쇼 남장 다 전화기 쇼 남장 타니별로 타니벨로 제대로 나와 난두라 제바 샤네스 제대로기 쇼든도 양안도 담바투바 나 랑우투바 나 세야데 컨디치도 센티 때제부터 마제브체 티바샤 둘라 제바나 히 대파 샤 송고 요더라야
No.
당이 질로 온게 제대로 나와티 투라 제바 샤네 슈 데남게 랑게 내로 시다부이 냠도 아니 비 유딩도 제바나 지야 마두바 따데 간데나 친한게 슈 남데 간데라 따동 때니 바지 쪽배이나 바때니 인데스니 쪽배이나 되니야 여러베스나 두기 땡도 정말 특별 등도 두기 자기 정세 있잖아 니야 매버 된나히기 친하게 주 남지 땡도야 각자 드베게 따동 때니 즉 바지 딱이나 가르쳐다 정세 되니야 요 말이지 오다 뒤숭구요 살에
No.
로서
So there's an example given which starts at the bottom of page 212 and on top of page 213. The example is that of an imaginary snake ascribed to a coiled rope, right? And Khensur says that different schools of thought may prefer different examples to explain the ultimate nature of things. For example, Savatandrika Madhyamigans, Huma Rangjuba, among many examples they could use, they consider the magical creation as the best example to explain the disparity between how things appear to us and how things actually exist. That's a cool one, the example. And the Prasangika Madhyamika said, among the many examples, they said, what we prefer, the imaginary snake ascribed to the rope. That is a cool example, right? So they have a different coolness here going on. So now we are with the Prasangika this time, so we have to deal with the snake, So, of course, in the Buddhist literature, there's whole conditions described. Under given conditions, then you might have that mistaken apprehension, right? And some of the conditions they said is, it should not be completely dark. Then we don't see anything, isn't it? There could be snake, there could be monster, whatever. What do we see? But it has to be kind of a light dark. You can't see things clearly, but it's kind of, that kind of condition. And then the rope has to be coiled like a snake. It has to be in that kind of a mode. It can't be just like a rope. Then who is going to, think it's a snake? So it will be coiled like a rope. So under such given conditions, should a person come, who anyway freak out with a snake, thinks, oh my gosh, there's a snake, right? He will freak out. Okay? So let's use his example here. Okay? So he got so scared because he thought there was a snake in that dark corner, right? Coiled, corner. He didn't know it is not a snake. Okay? So he got so frightened. Okay? And now if we were to analyze, is there a real snake there or not? Okay? If there's a snake, then we should be, findable there, isn't it? So you look on every pieces of the coiled rope, say, where is the snake, isn't it? You cannot find snake because it's just your imaginary projection onto that. Okay? So instead of analyzing that, but if he goes into the mode like, oh my gosh, there's a snake, and then in the second moment he thinks, I want to know how big the snake is. I want to know what color it is. I want to know how big the eyes are. If going all that mode thing, it's all meaningless thing because there is no real snake. But now you want to know about the color and the size and the eyeballs and all of the things. It's just crazy, isn't it? And so then you look at, okay, whatever you imagine the snake to be, you just go and find, is there really real snake there? You cannot find it. Okay, it's just your imaginary projection onto a coiled rope. And you got just scared because you believe there's a real snake and then you freak out, isn't it? So that example is used to explain how, for us ordinary beings, things appear to us as intrinsically existing or existing objectively in and of themselves. That's how things appear to us. And then we believe, just like this person believed in, as if there's a real snake, we believe that's how the things exist. Okay? And so now if we analyze it, do they really exist the way they appear to exist to my perceptions? Then we are not going to be able to find, the things existing in that mode. Are you with me? That's what we call, it's unfindable under the ultimate analysis. The Tibetan expression is taktan selva. If you try to look for what is imputed onto the things, that imputed phenomenon is unfindable under ultimate analysis. Because why? Things don't exist in that way. Just like there's no real snake there. Okay? So in the same way, things don't exist in that mode. So I'm trying to see if I'm missing anything. That's it. Yeah. No.
로 스토제. 다티 샴데다 이제 kok하고 기울이 야도도 가리나 찌신. 다티 샴데디 송고도 마두바인라스. 테더튼 셈바스. 테더트 민심바. 다 따동 추 가이나 듀를 차 듀기 탁대 원래 듀기 차시 정세 자 매바 제듯이. 천하기 추 남기 땡도 따동 대비 니야 매비 니제 틴텐 디인 거라 왔다. 테더트 여러분 대충 만도 대다르도 민든 봤다. 근데 제니 딱동 때문에 니야 매부터 만든 맞지? 아니 가르치는 간데 되게서는 탄입이 시외 원기 작반 멤버다. 가장 딘두고요. 탄입이 시외 원기 작반 멤버 인증 딘두도 발라 가장 딘두도. 작반 멤버 쇼 대달라랑랑게 뭐네 셀베 내루데 요버는 된 봤대. 다티 간지 가장 된 봤대. 지기어라. 공부 시에 나신데 가장 된 봤대. 송구 요사랬다. 시에 내루 레 요버는 된 봤대. 대인밭 가르쳐는 시답인 제발레 어디 가르송교 와서는 똑바 요바 건네 요바 니탄 다 똑바함 단입이 시마 가르데 대 온기 샷베 슈라 요바요아레 대 온기 샷바 마이베 슈지 민도가 매베 이사 대 온기 샷베 NP 똑바 요바 대 온기 샷베 똑바 요바 건네 요바 니탄 근데 그 애네 똑바 매반 똑바 매버라 요바니 매바데 똑바 디 아니 가르도 저 샤과 마임베 애네 저 요바지 매반니데 대다게 고르마자 다 티비티스나 고르마자세야 돼 태좀 매세야 진짜다 태좀 매베질 고구야 고르마자세 이게 날 자기를 봤던도 태좀 매대 고르마자세야 돼 가르잖아 태좀 요 말이스 근데 시그리세야 지리다 고르마자 봐라 아니 탁바 도발라 딱베 탁바 도발라 딱베 듀타라 랑게고 마두바라 녜소 같이난게 쉬는 탁바 딘데스 도발 듀기 차중세 매바 따라 아니 다 가르서 랑게고 랑게지도 마두바 아니 그랬다 다 가르치네 듀듀 내가 간제지 값이네야데 두바 민두 센다 네버리스 네버리스 히랑게고 다 자긴다 히랑게고 마두베 투 대더라 송초 다제다 랑군에 마두 랑게고 마두베 때에 단다 타라를 빼산 송야디 어딘데 송송 쓰기 유사래 히랑게고 마두베 투 대더도 송소 제 어다 딥파데 자유래.
So in the middle of page 213, we have a passage quoted from Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas on the middle path. And the passage reads, "Without any doubt, what exists only through the presence of conceptual thought and does not exist without conceptual thought definitely does not exist essentially, as in the case of a snake that is imputed to a coiled rope," unquote. Yes. So the explanation given on this by Khensur Rinpoche is just like, in the case of the person, who thought there was a snake in that dark corner, although that's like imaginary snake, right, your mental projection, but he did not realize that, it's his own mental projection. He really thought there's a snake, objectively there. So freaked out, isn't it? But once you go and analyze it, then you realize there is no snake, which he thought it was there, because you can look at the coiled rope and there is nothing snaky about it. Well, there's nothing real snake in it, In the same way, for us, phenomena appear to exist objectively and intrinsically, and we believe that's how it exists, but that's how it exists. The way things exist is things are merely imputed by terms and concepts, isn't it? And so things' existence are dependent upon terms and concepts. But we don't see that. You see, we don't see how things are imputed by terms and concepts. But we think as if they exist from their side, just like the man who freaked out about the snake thought the snake existed from that side. So our kind of intrinsic belief that reality, that is the object of negation, and because that's the kind of reality that we have fabricated, superimposed onto phenomena, just like his imaginary mind superimposed snake onto a coiled rope, so we superimpose intrinsic reality onto everything that exists, and then we get caught up in our own projection. Let me see. No.
다가 자기 인스트링 자가 이게 지까마진 야 뒤에서 건자는 난게는 나는 되게 되면은 노바동 샹데 그래봐.
No. So we will stop there today, and we yield the floor for you to ask questions, make observations, anything like that. If you don't have, we have another event right after this. We can do the dedications or whatever you choose. There is the mic if anybody needs. Microphone, yeah, over there.
Rinpoche, my understanding is that intrinsic reality does not exist, but ignorance that imputes intrinsic reality exists. Then reasoning refutes the intrinsic reality. The path refutes ignorance, or negates ignorance. Now, what does that term, the path, refer to?
Okay.
And why isn't the reasoning itself also part of the path?
Okay. Korakari shwe de dire duwa. Da karso gore di panata rangshin druba segen di ko ngobe ne jalo yomar wa ta ko ta song gi nganzu lo mari be server song wa.
reality.
Ja za xin yu ga de ko yin be na wa chue tam je ni lu del ka rangshin de dru yomar de nganzu dru yor sam ge wa ta di ga cha de che wa.
really.
다디 가서 가서 이나 단다 데로 균전 셰브 거는 가서 가투고 여러와서 다 최담 랑신 두비오 마스 바카투고 여러와서 여러와 다디 치디 갈이야 다 머리버시 여러와 콜로 중에 머리바들와
라리.
머리바디 곡체디 가래 람 차데 여러와서 여러와
라.
머리바 곡체 람 머리버스 가이 코디 니 섬르던 거 캔서는 뭐지 신유 가야디 릭베가 다 머리베 가야디 람기 가고 여러와서 여러와 람여러와 and mari ba de lam ke ka ko tanda rigba da karang ke mari ba de gam hodo ba de kari sebres korda rigba da sha ro ke zo sense ho na ro
자 야구 자 하고 봐선다.
adida ke zo de
이네 야다 비가 돼.
ma da ke zo de da dero mari ba ka rangshin dro ba de shin yu she ta di rigba ga go ro wa ko ha ko do sa da mari ba sa yo ma rang zo se ro wa
라리.
ta yin mari ba chu ro ko ji lo de mari ba ga ya di 아니 균전 다게 망가 버자 양 람기 갖고 해도 가르쳐면은 그런다.
그래. 다디 마리부터 람기 가다 가게 말이다. 마리부 거란다 가르쳐다 가게 말아 봐. 마리부 여 들어 봐. 다 강주 공원도 휴 살아라 봐. 같이 또 봐지 휴 살아. 연다 릭베 가 미르베 저. 지다 각자들 람기 각자 생이 찍다. 릭베 각자 생이 찍기 니 와리 들어라. 니 와리. 다 람기 각자 생이 요 댕기지 차기 와레스 릭베 까자 생게데 매 댕기지 차그레스 다치다 마릭파 가 마가 집에 기 마릭파 가야디 그래서 람게 가세야 릭베 가세야디 갈서다 네니 차인거도 와 차인데 발로 또저를 세워 마도 저기라 마릭파 코란티 가도야 자요 마리 또 릭베 가야기 현유드 가야들이 현유 그 현유드 가고 마도 마릭파 코라 비게치 갈서 세바리들이 세리기 차지리들이 대피게지 그 진당 대피게지 매버 속고기 얼마도 그런 가치는 인디베지 가동야 개요 말이스
No. Thank you, Islam. Khensur says that as we talked about this some time ago, that in terms of objective negations, there are two kinds: objects of negation by the path and objects of negations by reasoning. The object of negation by reasoning is something that shouldn't exist. Objects of negation by the past is something that exists. Okay? And referring to your question, yes, through reasoning we are able to refute intrinsic reality. It's not there. Okay? But the marikpa, ignorance, it exists. So we cannot refute something that exists. Okay? So by understanding the reasoning, that'll help us to be able to cultivate the path that will help us to remove or eliminate ignorance. But we are not in the, how should I say, in the venture of refuting the existence of ignorance, because that's a fact. We have to exist. Ignorance exists. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Yeah.
I also want to ask about the path. What exactly is this? What is that term, the path, referred to? The path.
You mean the path that...
The path that negates ignorance.
Okay, right. So the Quran some discord that and the Karso that this segment some that bana mazuna mariba gas the mariba say chorwa say lam di kawal ko ko re sa da shinyu rangshin de be shinyu ka ga de rigba ga ga yorwa ta mariba senge ki lam sa korwa lam de kawal ko ko re sa to da
e thagre dikpat ge segi warta mariba gas di bal kharsa urta rigba yi
tame de be no
rigba yi ki mitun chod churbe dentang jorwa ti ga yundi bal ta ti karta lam imbe ta chaba yo marwa ti lama shungna ti yu me ga ko yorwa ine ya lam le ya shuk on ti chaba ina mari rigba yi ki dentang mitun chod ti mari ko te ga yundi khora ni rigba yi ti khare ti yare lam re ti yare ga chu ti ta rigbe ka go do ga ti rigbe patang ni inde chene ti ka go do
no. So maybe that's the true part. As we apply reasoning analysis to refute intrinsic nature of things, that reasoning also generates the wisdom part, the knowledge part. It's that knowledge which really counteracts the ignorance. Because what we're saying is ignorance sees phenomena to exist intrinsically. But when we analyze it, we start to see that things don't exist in that way. So that understanding of the knowledge, it how should I say, counteracts with the ignorance. Yeah. Oh, yeah, one more over there.
Oh, yeah, can I allow Kamale? Okay. Not going to that.
Thank you for your teaching, Rinpoche. I was struggling with one aspect. When we say selflessness,
yes,
and several times I heard no self.
Yes.
Is selflessness the no self, the absence of self? Or is it simply the absence of an intrinsic self?
Okay.
Meaning there is a self, and that self exists, but only exists conventionally, not intrinsically. Or does it not exist at all?
Okay, sure. Kora kan de shwe de din su da nga zo dan da ta me se jo ro wa. Ta yo mar se jo ro wa. Ta yo mar ta me se jo ro wa. Se za di ko den di jik se se na ro na sa pe na ta me ta yo mar se di ane ka rangshin ki trube ta se ro yo mar chi ta yo le so ba ko den di re yan ta ko ran san yo mar se go re ka se go re sa ta ta me ko den silen go ro wa. Chi ta ta nye de ta yo re so rangshin trube ta yo mar se di lab go re di ko wa de ne silen go re sa.
Te tagaran re. Rashi trube ta di yo mari tanyin trube ta di yo se go ro ta. Tana ta randi tu ta ma wa te la su chi me khansa te yu de se ne ta ndu tu la sende randi na to jo ra ba ta ran lu khar che ra na mi me ta se ra ba ta dang ro wa na ge ta da nya be sin che ta dong yu ge do ta so jin ni sa ge ta dong yu ge do ta me na ti ta dong yu ge do ti la mi khar chi ge na te rang shen chi ma tu be ta ti de ne ja wa chi ma pha dong ge 천만년 대용객이 딱 그게 이제 딱담 다 지어라다 공방가서 가론을 봤딱 다디 뒤 요하더라 봐. 뒤 요스게 요 맞지. 라시스 집에 다 스니티 다 단지 건디티 남른 전문나 셰브나 신리 요디 요 마레스 양라 말레베 다지 요 마레스 대 숭게 왔다데 차란데 다가라리 기랑 숭야 다가라데스
What you said is right, that today we have to differentiate between conventional self, we call Tanya Devata, and then intrinsic self. Okay? And the conventional self exists, or the person exists, because it is considered as that which is imputed onto a collection of persons' 5 physical and mental aggregates. And that person or the self exists because you perform all kinds of functions, and when we die, it is that self which goes from one life to the other life. So it exists. the kind of self that doesn't exist, we're trying to refute. It is, as you have said, there is the intrinsic self, the kind of self that exists in and of itself. Such a self doesn't exist at all, but hypothetically speaking, right, we can think about that. Okay? And so as Khensur said, like, conventional self does exist, because this is why we practice and we make prayers, right? May I and all mother sentient beings be able to do whatever, right? So that I exists, the conventional self, but there is no intrinsic I or the self. So it's important for us to differentiate between the two kind of self. So selflessness refers to, right, the emptiness of intrinsic self. At the same time, Khensur questions us that in different Buddhist schools of thought, also in non-Buddhist schools of thought, you see, they use different language. Some even in the Buddhist school assert that there is self-sufficient, substantially existent self of the I. Okay, whereas Pasangika Madhya can say, no, it isn't. So that's all. It's a very complex thing, but what you say is right. Yeah. So we will stop there today, and we will do our prayers and dedication. I think there will be no children's class next Sunday, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. First in Tibetan, Manjushri prayer. Lama da gombo je jen jang be yang la cha je kang lo de tin yin tin da yin da nam da rab se be chin yin dun gun chi she si je ni je tu ga le ba kang da si be zhen le ma ri men dong dong ge ji se be ro zo gun la bo je da yan la zhu zhe yang den song ru da che zhuo nian mo nian le je jia zhuo zhe zhe jian ma ri men se dong yin niu guo jin ye zhe zhe ra zhe 年年大节杀猪大水，元旦轮作假设都有过，就照知道主人。现在大路没人江边养了。对，我妈的把人呐，我妈的把人呐，现在确切见到为谁见，大陆天幕明白热身的，看到天主雄鹿动，落着宝贝那王子。说电报娘们对着手上在路着头面，边着就对象，地方搞了业绩总干部，天天给来这边别的，长久宁波西北雄狼些，让他注定送节来的。 nam dang cho ye nyam do che be be ban de la me sha la so ju du che be ke ra le dam de nyam da ru gun ro be sim je sang wa ri ni nian zhuo la zhe be lo sang yang den be 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 do yin ma nga ye rang da chi de be yi gu me she dong wa de guan la ye de be ze yang zhe shen na be yu zhe zhou Manjushri prayed in English. He who has the intuitive wisdom that disperses the clouds of true obscuration, like the sun shedding a glorious light that's utterly pure. He who understands all meanings whatsoever of perfect realization, from whose heart emerges the lotus holding the books of the perfection of wisdom. Those who live in samsara are the prisoners of ignorance, afflicted by the darkness of suffering. Looking after all sentient beings with compassion, like a mother looking after an only child, you have a melodious voice of 60 tones. Roaring like a dragon, you wake people from the sleep of conflicting emotions, freeing one from the iron shackles of karma, dispelling the darkness of the ignorance. Thus you wield the sword which cuts down the shoots of suffering. Primarily pure, having reached the 10th Bodhisattva level, the perfect body of highest qualities, the foremost son of the Buddha, adorned with 112 ornaments, major and minor physical perfections of a Buddha, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Please dispel the darkness of my mind. Om Arabaza Nadi, I beseech you with the loving kindness of your omniscient light rays to completely dispel the dark ignorance of my mind, thus giving me to understand the teachings of the Buddha, their elucidating treatises and commentaries. O peerless Savior and Supreme Teacher, Shuddhodana's son, all the 17 masters and adepts, Nagarjuna and the Sangha and so on, all Dibamkar as well as Sovereign Father Tsongkhapa, gloriously appeared here today to grant auspiciousness. On the great path leading to the heart of enlightenment, you have traversed by means of the perfect threefold discipline and have enhanced ever higher the realizations of the enlightened qualities. O glorious Guru, we offer our supplications at your feet. Pray return gloriously to propagate the teaching of Lobsang by tying well the sash of monastic disciplinary precepts and generating the altruistic intention to free all beings, engage in the tantric yogas of the two stages. Think of the unbearable pain of the sentient beings who are enveloped in the forces of 5 degenerations, and to open wide the lotus grove of the Buddha's teaching. May your reincarnation appear soon as a source of merit for us. Shabe Side Mo Tenjo Ye Dang Guru Rana Mande Logo Niyanda. I have an announcements to make. After like 5-10 minutes recess, Geshe Changju Dorje has been invited to give a talk on, I don't know what the title is, so how did we find Geshe-la's reincarnation, I guess, something like that, anyway. That topic he will speak about, so